Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York, winter 2025. The streets were covered with a light dusting of frost, and the biting air seemed to freeze every moment of urban life. Horns blared between the skyscrapers, and the hurried crowd pressed onto the sidewalks, absorbed in their own urgent matters. Amid this bustle, a woman sat on the ground, leaning against a shop window, a small, worn piece of cardboard in front of her on which was scrawled, "Hungry. Need help." Her name was Lydia, and her face reflected years of silent struggle. Her deep brown eyes seemed to observe the world with keen attention, but also with a mistrust born of repeated rejections, insults, and humiliations. Her tangled hair and worn clothes told a story few wanted to hear, that of a life stolen by poverty, misfortune, and indifference. Across the street, a black limousine weaved through the traffic. Inside, Richard Bennett, a man in his 50s, watched the city drift by through the window. His perfectly manicured hands held a state-of-the-art smartphone. His life seemed perfect: wealth, power, recognition. Yet, behind the suit and the polished smile, Richard carried an invisible burden. Years of hard work, crushing responsibilities, and loneliness had drained him of something essential. He was rich, but strangely alone. That morning, for a reason he couldn't explain, Richard decided to get out of his limousine and walk around a bit. He wanted to feel the city, to experience the reality of its streets. He wanted, perhaps subconsciously, to rediscover a human connection he had lost over the years. As he walked on, his eyes met Lydia's. She wasn't pleading with him, wasn't gesturing wildly. She was simply looking at him, with an intensity that unsettled him. In her gaze, he saw raw humanity, a blend of vulnerability and dignity. He stopped, his breath forming small clouds in the icy air. He felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time, pure compassion, without calculation, without ulterior motive. And in that silence, thick with tension and life, a decision came to him, as if his heart knew before his mind what he had to do. He took out his wallet, took a deep breath, and handed Lydia his unlimited credit card. Lydia blinked in disbelief. The passers-by continued on their way, indifferent. But in that suspended moment, the lives of two people whom everything separated would be irrevocably altered, each in their own way. This simple yet radical gesture would mark the beginning of a transformation that would change Richard and Lydia forever. And that is how destiny sometimes reveals itself in the smallest of decisions: a look, a gesture, a courageous choice, capable of shaking entire lives. The icy New York wind made Lydia shiver as she sat down on her usual cardboard box. Her hands, red and chapped, clutched an old coat too thin for winter. Each day was like the last: hunger, the indifference of passers-by, the cold. But that morning, something unexpected happened. Richard Bennett was approaching on foot, which was unusual for him. He had left his limousine behind and wanted to experience the city, to touch its reality. When he saw Lydia, he stopped dead in his tracks. Their eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, the noise of the city seemed to disappear. "Hello, are you hungry?" asked Richard, a little hesitantly. Lydia looked up. No one ever spoke to her like that. Most people looked away or tossed her a coin condescendingly. She remained silent, surprised. Yes, she finally murmured. Richard hesitated, then took out his wallet and pulled out a card, which he gently handed over. "I want you to have this, a credit card. Unlimited. Not to get rich, but to have choices. Buy what you need, find a place to live, eat, live. Do what you want with it." Lydia took it, her hands trembling. Her gaze was a mixture of fear and disbelief. Why me?" she stammered. "Because," Richard confessed, his voice trembling, "because I've never helped anyone like this before. And perhaps, because you deserve it." Lydia shook her head, still in shock. She had never met anyone capable of such a gesture, of such blind trust. "I cannot accept. I don't want to." "Yes," Richard insisted gently. You have the right to choose your life. Nothing else. Lydia remained silent, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. Finally, she murmured. Thank you very much. Richard smiled, a little awkwardly. For him, it wasn't just an act of charity. It was a bridge, a human contact he had missed for years. As he walked away, Lydia looked at the card in his hand. She had no idea that this small piece of plastic would change her life and Richard's forever. The days that followed were strange for Lydia. She kept the credit card carefully tucked away in the lining of her worn coat, like a fragile and unbelievable treasure. Every time she looked at it, her heart beat faster, a piece of plastic that held the key to a freedom she had never known. The first morning, she approached a small local supermarket. The cashier, used to modest customers, watched her curiously when Lydia placed the card on the counter. Is this, for real? Asked the cashier, hesitantly. Yes, replied Lydia, still incredulous. She obtained some provisions, bread, milk, fresh fruit. Nothing luxurious, just what she needed to survive with dignity. Then she took another step. She found a small apartment in a modest but clean and safe neighborhood. For the first time in years, she entered a place that belonged to her, that truly was hers. Meanwhile, Richard watched from afar. He didn't want to intrude on her life, but he felt strangely connected to every choice she made. Every time he saw her smile as she carried her groceries, he felt a warmth he had never known, a mixture of pride and pure emotion. He understood that a simple gesture could trigger a chain of unexpected transformations. One morning, Lydia mustered her courage and returned to the place where she had met Richard. She couldn't see him, but talking to the air seemed to bring her comfort. I don't know how to thank you, she said in a low voice. Thank you for the life you gave me. Richard, who had approached discreetly, smiled without revealing himself. He let her speak the words, feeling each syllable resonate within him. It was as if the whole world had stopped turning, just for those suspended moments. Little by little, Lydia regained her confidence. She began looking for work, and thanks to her new apartment, clean clothes, and restored dignity, she was hired at a small neighborhood cafe. Her smile, previously shy and infrequent, became a constant presence. Richard, meanwhile, was beginning to feel something he hadn't anticipated, an inner upheaval. He realized that his action hadn't just changed Lydia's life, but had also awakened a humanity within himself that he had almost lost. True wealth, he understood, lay not in bank accounts or real estate, but in the capacity to do good, to create a real impact on the lives of others. And that morning, watching Lydia walk confidently down the street, Richard felt an emotion he had never known, gratitude for receiving in return the joy and strength that his gesture had generated. Lydia had now settled into a routine that gave her a sense of stability she had never known before. Her small apartment was modest but cozy, a clean bed, curtains that filtered the morning light, and on the table, a few carefully arranged fresh fruits and vegetables. Every morning, she woke up with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, wondering what the day would bring. At the cafe where she worked, she quickly became known for her kindness and helpfulness. Customers appreciated her presence, but it was above all her gaze, her newfound dignity, and her discreet smile that captivated them. She never spoke of her past, but it was evident in every gesture, a blend of strength and gentleness, of caution and newfound confidence. Meanwhile, Richard continued to observe her development from afar, never interfering. He felt a growing emotion, something he had never truly experienced despite his wealth and power. Each step Lydia took toward independence awakened in him a profound humanity he had long neglected. One afternoon, he decided to stop discreetly in front of the cafe. He watched her serve customers with grace and professionalism. Lydia looked up and met his gaze, not immediately realizing he was watching her. In that simple exchange of glances, Richard felt a wave of emotions rise within him, admiration, pride, tenderness, and above all, an intense awareness of the weight and fragility of human life. He withdrew into the shadows, letting those moments pass. But once alone in his limousine, he burst into tears. The tears flowed freely, for reasons he struggled to fully understand, not for himself, nor for his own pain, but for the beauty and fragility of Lydia's transformation, for the vulnerability he had witnessed, for all the lives he had previously ignored. These tears were a liberation. They came from the realization that he had finally found meaning in his wealth. It wasn't the money that mattered, but the ability to give, to help, and to reconnect with the humanity of others. For her part, Lydia felt a new strength growing within her. The credit card was just a tool, a symbol, but it had opened a door to a life where she could make her own choices, regain her autonomy, and rebuild her existence. She realized she could dream again, that each morning was a chance, and that her dignity, which she thought was lost, could finally shine forth. This chapter of their lives marked a decisive step. Lydia was rising, not only physically, but spiritually, and Richard understood that true wealth was measured by the impact one had on the world around them. A few weeks after Richard's gesture, Lydia had found an unexpected balance in her life. She worked confidently at the cafe, had friends in the neighborhood, and had started saving for a future that finally belonged to her. The fragile woman of the past had given way to a strong, proud, and dignified person. That morning, Richard decided to take a step he had never dared to take before. He entered the cafe where Lydia worked, dressed simply, without her guards or her limousine. He wanted to see her in her own world, the one she had rebuilt through her own efforts. Lydia saw him enter and hesitated for a moment. Her heart was beating fast. She knew who he was, but above all she felt a deep gratitude for the man who had given her this chance. "Hello, Lydia," said Richard, his voice slightly trembling. "Hello, Richard," she replied, with a shy but sincere smile. They sat down at a table off to the side. Richard watched Lydia, noticing little things he had never seen before, the way she smiled at customers, the grace with which she moved, the strength in her eyes. "You have changed my life," Lydia said softly. I don't know how to thank you enough." "It wasn't me, it was you," replied Richard, tears welling up in his eyes. "You took what I gave you and you made something magnificent out of it." At that moment, Richard burst into tears. The tears flowed freely, revealing all the emotion he had suppressed for years. Gratitude, admiration, compassion, and pride mingled in an irresistible wave. Lydia, touched by this unexpected vulnerability, placed a hand on his. "Richard, you gave me a life. Not just money, but a chance, a choice, and that, no one can ever take away from me." Richard nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He realized that this gesture, this simple act of generosity, had been a lesson for both him and Lydia. True wealth, he finally understood, lay not in bank accounts or buildings, but in the ability to change lives, to inspire hope and dignity. They remained there, silent, sharing this moment of raw, pure humanity. For Richard, it was a liberation. His tears were a sign that he had rediscovered a part of himself he had long since lost. For Lydia, it was confirmation that even in adversity, kindness and dignity could triumph. And so, in that modest New York cafe, two lives that seemed to have nothing in common crossed paths and were transformed forever by a simple but radical gesture, a gift of hope, an outstretched hand, and the ability to believe again in human goodness.